Today I'm going to analyze a game from the World Cup which is taking place right now in Norway, in the city Tromsø. It is already round 4 of the tournament, which is not a normal tournament, it's a KO competition, which means you play against a player 2 games, and if you lose you're out of the tournament. So from 128 players who started in the competition, only 16 players are left. And today I'm going to take a look at the game Gata Kamsky against Shakhriyar Mamedyarov. Gata Kamsky, second best player from the US, and Shakhriyar Mamedyarov, I think either second best or best player from Azerbaijan. So let's get right into it. White start with e4, c5, we see a Sicilian, but we don't know yet which one. e6, d4, c takes d4, knight takes d4, knight c6, and now it becomes clear black wants to play Taimanov variation. Now Kamsky goes for the rather, I would say, unusual move f4, but which is completely playable, of course. Just normally white plays something like bishop e3 and then decides either to castle queenside or castle kingside. Well, f4. And now the position kind of enters a Scheveninger variation with the pawns on e6 and d6, and it's not really a Taimanov anymore. Bishop e3, knight f6, queen f3, natural setup here from white, very harmonic. a6. And now white also had the option to castle queenside again, maybe advance with g4, g5, but he decided to play bishop d3, preparing the short castle. Bishop e7, castle, castle. King h1, always a useful move to keep the king out of this diagonal a7 to g1. Usually white always plays this move in this kind of positions, and also actually if he castles queenside he always plays king b1, also to get the king on a better spot for the later battle. Bishop d7, preparing at b5. Immediately b5 is not possible because of e5, and now knight on f6 is hanging, and black has some difficulties on this long diagonal. So bishop d7, rook a e1, again logical move to bring the other rook to the center, and preparing at some point to play e5, and we will see it's actually going to happen in the game. e5, a3, preventing black from playing b4, which would be helpful for him because the knight would need to retreat from c3 and would go to a worse square, so black would gain something. Now I played rook a b8. It seems he wants to play b4. White took on c6 now, bishop takes c6 and queen h3. Again, standard move to play the queen here on h3, which is now both pieces, bishop on d3 and queen on h3, are looking on the spot on h7. And if white plays e5, this can become pretty dangerous pretty quickly. Mamedyarov played a new move now here. I mean, position's not really well known anyway. Usually all players played rook bd8 in this position. Mamedyarov played rook fd8. I don't know, maybe it's necessary to keep the rook here on f8 to defend the position, but on the other hand, well, now at least both rooks are somehow in the game. Now white had different options here. He played bishop d2, which is reasonable, but he could also play more forcing lines. For example, e5. d takes e5, f takes e5. Yeah, black is forced to take because if the knight moves, then queen takes h7, followed by mate. So queen takes e5, bishop f4, now queen h5, queen takes, knight takes, and white wins the exchange here on b8, but the position remains pretty balanced. White is slightly better, but it's not much. Bishop e4 now, importantly, keeping the bishop pair here, either bishop d7 or maybe even better bishop e8. And if white wants to win this game, he has to do a lot of work, that's for sure. There was another interesting option here to play bishop d4, again preparing to play e5, but now black can play himself e5, f takes e5, f takes e5, and now knight d5. Again, it's all about the spot h7. Like, white wants to try to distract the knight on f6 from this square. So the bishop takes on d5, and now importantly for white not taking back, then black can just play rook d5 and it's completely fine. But he has bishop takes e5. Queen takes e5 is forced, e takes d5, queen takes d5. And now white doesn't take on e7 but on f6, because again he wants to mate the black king. And the only way to play on here for black is to sacrifice his queen. Queen takes d3, c takes d3, and bishop takes f6. Now black has bishop and rook for the queen, but the bishop is really strong here on f6. The pawn d3 is weak, so it seems black has really good chances to defend himself here, even though of course it is white who can try to play on and play for a win. Okay, let's go back. Bishop d2. Now white is threatening to play e5, and now black plays himself d5. Well, obviously white plays e5 nevertheless. Knight e4. And this is working tactically now because, okay, Kamsky played f5, but white cannot win the pawn here on e4 because in the end the bishop on d2 is hanging. Which actually opens up the question for me why Kamsky not maybe moved the bishop to c1 here instead, because then this whole variation wouldn't be possible. Anyways, he had something different in mind. He wanted to play f5, and which sacrifices a piece. Well, so he took on d2, accepted the sacrifice. If black takes on f5, then just queen takes f5, and this doesn't look really good for black anymore. e6, and white is clearly better. Knight takes d2 now isn't working because of queen takes h7 mate. So knight takes d2, f takes e6. Now again mate is threatening, so the only move is to play knight e4, e takes f7 check, king h8, also forced. And now again an important move, knight takes d5. Kamsky also had to see this move before he played this whole variation. Bishop takes d5, and now again nice move, rook takes e4. White wants to keep this bishop on d3 because he further wants to create mate threats against black king. So now the only move indeed is g6. If, well, first of all, white has a really beautiful threat. Let's say rook b6, then white can mate in 2 moves and double check, and if it's a double check the black king always has to move, but here he does not have a square to go, so it's mate. And if black takes the rook, then just bishop takes e4, and there's nothing black can do against this threat on h7. g6, just bishop takes g6, and h6, queen f5, and white mates. So g6 was forced. Now Kamsky played rook e f4, and the position remains very complicated. White has 3 pawns for the piece, which is somewhat, you would say, is balanced for both sides, but okay, these pawns are really unpleasant here to play, and his king feels kind of unsafe. And here, indeed, Mamedyarov made a mistake. King g7. Possible is queen b6 to protect pawn on g6, which is hanging right now, but the position still remains complicated. But he could also take on e5, which would be actually the most natural move, because now black can bring his queen to g7, which helps to defend the position. Bishop d3, h6, rook g4, bishop g5, queen h5, rook f4. This is just an example line how the game could have continued. h4, bishop takes f7, rook takes f7, queen takes f7, and now rook takes g5, queen takes h5, rook takes h5, king g7, and the position is equal. White is an exchange down, but he has 2 pawns, and this is pretty much equal to a rook. Mamedyarov played king g7. Another problem is e6, and the threat is to queen on f8 and then enter into a black position with rook f7 followed by mate. Of course, Mamedyarov saw this idea, so he played rook f8, and now queen e3. Clearly, White wants to put his queen on this long diagonal, and this would force the king to go on h6, and this means he would go out of his pawn. He would be open and he could be easily attacked. So Mamedyarov prevents this by playing bishop c5, now queen e1, again threatening to go to c3. And now Mamedyarov made the final mistake already. He should have played bishop e7 back, because it's important for black to keep an eye on this spot on h4. I have to delete this move for a second, because I always have to put in the move which was actually played, and then now we can take a look at bishop e7. Now White has a strong move to play c4 in order to free this square c3, so now he can check on c3 and the queens are not exchanged. King h6. And White does not have something immediately here against the black king, but he can just take on c4. Rook takes c4, queen d6, rook c6, and the pieces of White are really active now. He has 3 pawns for the piece, and yeah, these pawns on f7, e6 are very unpleasant and kind of paralyzing black. So White is clearly better here, but the fight is not over yet. Things are different after bishop d6. Now rook h4. It's already threatening to take on h7 and play queen h4 and queen f6 and mating. So bishop e7 is forced. And probably this now is the move Mamedyarov overlooked. Queen e3. What a strong move. White is not only threatened to go to h6, but also to d4. And this is why black can't take on h4. White plays queen d4 check. Black has to go to h6. Queen takes h4 check. King g7, queen f6, king h6, and now rook f4. Threatening mate. Only way to prevent this is queen takes rook, queen takes check, and now White can also win this piece on d5, and of course he will continue with e7. It's completely lost for black. So Mamedyarov played h5, but it's already too late. He cannot defend his position anymore. Queen d4 check, king h6, also after king h7 rook takes h5 mate, and after king h6 again rook takes h5. And at this point Mamedyarov resigned. Well, we could take a short look how to continue here. If he takes with the pawn, it's pretty easy. White plays rook f6, and bishop takes mate. If he takes with the king, then queen g7, and black doesn't have a way to defend his pawn on g6. Best move would be rook h8, but doesn't change anything. Queen takes g6, king h4, and white is going to mate sooner or later. So in this position, Mamedyarov resigned. In this position. Yeah, straightforward attacking game by Kamsky. Mamedyarov only made 2 mistakes, but well, sometimes 2 mistakes are enough in such complicated tactical positions. And well, Kamsky played a really strong game. Nice blows. I mean, especially this whole combination to get these pawns on f7 and e6 was pretty nice, I think. I hope you enjoyed the game as well, and I will see you next time.